There are moments in time that we, as observers, feel a part of, even from a distance. We call them viral moments or shocking twists. We share them, we talk about them, and then we usually move on. But for the people at the center of that storm, the moment never ends. It just changes. This is a story about such a moment. A night that was supposed to be a coronation. A simple, predictable Tuesday night broadcast. But it became something else. It became a reckoning. The title was on the line. The arrogant champion, the one who had methodically taken apart every challenger, stood tall. Her opponent was a formality. A last-minute replacement, someone whose name the commentators barely mentioned without a hint of pity. The champion Nyx ascended the top rope, a smirk playing on her lips. She raised her arms, basking in the booze she had learned to feed on. This was her signature, the fallen star press, the end. But then, something happened. Something impossible. The crowd had no idea what they were about to witness. Out of nowhere, she countered midair. The replacement, the formality, the move that changed everything. The moment her boots hit the mat, a sound erupted. It wasn't a cheer. It was an explosion, a letting go of months of frustration. This wasn't luck. This was power, precision, and payback. She is back, and the SmackDown universe can't believe it. That sound. It's a living thing. It doesn't just enter your ears, it hits your chest. It's the sound of 10,000 people realizing they've been lied to, in the best way possible. For one singular second, there was silence. The silence of physics being broken. The champion, Nyx, was falling. Her trajectory was perfect. The formality, Ilara, was prone. But in that sliver of time, Ilara moved. She didn't just lift a shoulder. She didn't just roll. She caught the champion. Mid-air. She used Nyx's own momentum, shifting her weight with an elegance that defied the violence of the sport. It was a reversal so fluid, so unexpected, that it looked less like a counterattack and more like a dance partner correcting a misstep. Then, the impact. Ilara's boots on the canvas, Nyx's back slamming down with a sickening thud. The referee, his eyes wide, his brain catching up to his body, dropped to the mat. 1. The crowd was still processing. 2. A collective gasp, the inhale before the hurricane. 3. The bell rang, sharp and clean, cutting through the disbelief. And that's when the sound wave hit. It wasn't just noise, it was emotion. It was every fan who had felt ignored, every person who had been told no, erupting in a primal scream of yes. They weren't just cheering for a victory. They were cheering because they had just seen the impossible happen, right before their very eyes. But what happens after the explosion? After the roar crests and begins to recede? That is where the real story begins. In the center of the ring, the new champion, Ilara, didn't jump for joy. She didn't raise the title above her head. She simply knelt. One knee on the mat, her head bowed, her chest heaving. The crowd's cheers became something different. They became softer, a murmur of confusion, then respect. Was she hurt? Was she praying? Or was she just absorbing it? The cameras zoomed in, desperate to capture the tear they assumed was rolling down her cheek. But there were no tears, just focus. A stillness in the eye of the hurricane she had created. And across the ring, the former champion, Nyx, was experiencing a different kind of silence. The silence of utter, complete humiliation. She had been beaten, not just pinned, but solved. Her unbeatable move, the one that had graced posters and video game covers, had been turned into a punchline. She rolled, not to her feet, but under the bottom rope, slithering out of the ring like a wounded animal. She didn't look back. She couldn't. The booze that had been her fuel just moments before were now gone, replaced by the deafening, adoring chant of a name that wasn't hers. The chant of Ilara. The ghost had returned, and she had just stolen the entire kingdom. To understand the sound, you have to understand the silence that came before it. This wasn't just a return, it was a resurrection. A year ago, Elara and Nyx weren't just rivals. They were partners. They were the unbeatables, the darlings of the tag team division. They held the championships together, their styles a perfect blend of high-flying grace and brutal, ground-based power. Elara was the heart, Nyx was the hammer, and everyone loved them. But the machine of progress, it demands solo stars. It demands sacrifice. And one night, during a title defense, the sacrifice was made. It was a simple tag, a blind tag, Nyx called it. Elara didn't see it. She hit her finisher, turned to celebrate, and was met by Nyx holding the championship belt. Not in victory, but as a weapon. The first shot was to the head. The second, and third, and fourth were to Elara's already injured knee. The crowd watched in horror. The betrayal was so sudden, so total, that it felt personal. Nyx placed her boot on Elara's chest, raised her own belt, and the partnership was dissolved in the most brutal way imaginable. Elara wasn't just injured, she was erased. Her contract, we were told, was terminated due to the severity of her injury. She was done, vanished, replaced. And so, the exile began. While Nyx was being fast-tracked to the main event, given a new theme song, a new attitude, and the corporate backing of the entire company, Elara was in a physical therapy facility in a town no one had heard of. While Nyx was delivering arrogant promos about how she had cut the dead weight, Elara was learning to walk again. The narrative was set. Nyx was the future. Elara was the past. The media bought it. The company promoted it. And for a while, even the fans began to forget. Not the betrayal, but the person. She became a trivia question. Hey, remember her? But in that quiet, sterile room, surrounded by resistance bands and metal braces, a different kind of fuel was burning. It wasn't the roar of the crowd. It was the cold, quiet fire of payback. She didn't just rehab her knee. She rebuilt herself. She studied. She watched every single one of Nyx's matches. She watched the fallen star press 1,000 times. She saw the flaw, the tiny, fractional second opening that every other opponent had missed, too dazzled by the spectacle. Elara wasn't training to return. She wasn't training to win. She was training for that specific move. She was training for that specific moment. She knew Nyx's arrogance would one day be the perfect weapon. The camera feed cut to black. The broadcast went to a commercial for energy drinks and pickup trucks, but inside the arena, the pandemonium was just solidifying. Backstage, through the curtain at the gorilla position, it was chaos. Producers were screaming into headsets. Writers were tearing up scripts for the rest of the show. The entire night's plan was now in ashes, ignited by a single 3 count. And through this frantic, panicked sea of suits and technicians walked Elara. She still hadn't been given the championship belt. She didn't ask for it. She just walked. Her face was blank. Not happy, not relieved, just finished. She walked past the CEO, who had his hands on his head, staring at the monitor in disbelief. She walked past other wrestlers, the ones who had been her friends, who now looked at her with a mixture of awe and fear. They didn't see a colleague. They saw a ghost. They saw a threat. She had not only broken the script, she had set fire to the entire book. She hadn't gone through the proper channels. She hadn't earned her spot back. She had just taken it. She walked straight to her locker room, the one that still had a temporary nameplate on it, locked the door, and the first sound she made was a single heavy sigh. The sigh of a mission just beginning. In another room, a much larger room, the one with the star on the door, a different kind of drama was unfolding. Nyx, the former champion, was not yelling. She was not throwing things. That would come later. For now, she was sitting in front of her makeup mirror, the bright lights illuminating every pore. She was completely still. A single assistant, trembling, tried to offer her a bottle of water. Nyx didn't even look at him. She just stared at her own reflection. She was staring at a failure. But it was worse than that. She was staring at a joke. All her work, all the betrayals, all the promos, all the grinding, brutal matches to get to the top. Undone. Undone in 3 seconds by a woman who shouldn't have even been there. The narrative she had built, the one of the self-made champion, had been hijacked. She was now a part of Alara's story, a footnote, the villain in the comeback tale. The assistant quietly backed out of the room as Nick slowly, methodically, began to undo her bootlaces. Her hands were shaking, not with fear, not with sadness, but with a rage so pure, so cold it was almost silent. She hadn't just lost a match, she had lost her power. And she knew, in that moment, that getting the title back wouldn't be enough. She would have to end Alara, for good. By 8 a.m. the next morning, it was no longer a wrestling story. It was the story. The clip was everywhere. It was on morning news shows, the hosts faking knowledge about a top-rope body slam. It was on sports analysis programs, where pundits who normally covered baseball were breaking down the athletic precision of the counter. The company's stock price had jumped. The clip had 50 million views before the sun was fully up. Alara's face was, overnight, one of the most famous on the planet. But the narrative being spun was not the one she had lived. They called her a Cinderella story. They called her an underdog. They praised her resilience and fighting spirit. They crafted a perfect, marketable, heroic comeback story. But they missed the point. They missed the cold calculation. They saw the happy ending, not the brutal, year-long promise of vengeance. Alara, sitting in a generic hotel room, watched herself on the TV. She watched the smiling hosts praise her, and she felt nothing. They were celebrating a person who didn't exist. The person who did exist, the one who had sacrificed her body and her soul for this one moment, was already thinking about the next move. The machine that had discarded her was now trying to package her. And she would not be packaged. Her phone had been buzzing for 12 hours straight. Agents, lawyers, long-lost cousins. But there was one call she was dreading. It came late in the afternoon. Her mother. When she answered, there was no congratulations. There was no, "I'm so proud of you." There was just a sigh. The same sigh Alara had felt, but for a different reason. "You promised me," her mother said, her voice quiet, not angry, which was so much worse. "You promised you were done with this." Alara looked at her hands, the hands that had gripped the mat, that had found the leverage. They were steady, but her voice wasn't. "I had to, Mom. I had to finish it." There was a long pause on the line. "And is it finished?" her mother asked. Alara looked at the championship belt, tossed carelessly onto the other bed. It looked like a prop. It felt heavy. "No," she said, the truth of it landing hard. "I think it just started." Her mother sighed again. "They remember the hero, Alara. But I remember the hospital. I remember the screaming. I remember what it cost. Please, don't let it cost that much again." Alara had no answer. She had her payback. She had the title. But she had also just broken the one promise she had made when she had nothing left. The next SmackDown, the building was electric. The signs were all for her. The chants were deafening. Alara walked to the ring. No music, just the sound of the crowd. She held the microphone, and they waited. They waited for the triumphant speech. They waited for the tears of joy. They waited for the "I did it for all of you" line. Instead, she just stood there, letting the noise wash over her. She looked at the belt in her hand, and slowly, she began to speak. She didn't talk about her journey. She didn't talk about her pain. She talked about Nick's. She talked about the flaw in the fallen star press. She broke it down, technically, clinically, like a surgeon describing a procedure. The crowd grew quiet. This wasn't the speech they wanted. This was cold. And then, one by one, other wrestlers began to emerge onto the ramp. The entire women's division. They weren't clapping, they weren't smiling, they were staring at her and at the title. Ilara had her payback, yes, but in doing so, she had skipped the line. She had bypassed the hierarchy. She was the hero to the fans, but to the locker room, she was a problem. She had returned to a kingdom she didn't rule, holding a crown she hadn't earned in their eyes. The payback was over. The war had just begun. We love stories of return. We love payback. We are wired to cheer for the person who was wronged, the one who fights back against impossible odds to reclaim what was stolen. We want to believe in the triumph of the human spirit. That's what that mid-air reversal was supposed to be. The moment the crowd exploded, that was the story's perfect cinematic ending. But the cameras missed something. They were so focused on the shock of the move, the impact, the pin. They missed the whisper. As Ilara caught Nyx in that one impossible second where they were suspended in time, their faces inches apart, Ilara said something. The audio feed didn't catch it. The crowd didn't hear it. Only Nyx did. She didn't say, "I'm back." She didn't say, "This is for what you did." She just whispered two words, "You're done." It wasn't a threat. It was a verdict. The pinfall was a formality. The championship was a bonus. The crowd had cheered for a wrestling move. But Ilara had come back to end a career. The real payback wasn't the victory. It was the look of pure, unadulterated fear she saw in Nyx's eyes as they fell to the mat. The crowd thinks their hero is back. But the truth is, a monster just took the throne, and she's only just getting started.